On this episode, I interviewed Brooke Shang. Brooke started off with rent-to-owns. So for those that don't know, I've done episodes on rent-to-own in the past. If you want to learn about the strategy, you can go back and check those out. But she talks about why she shifted her strategy. She went from pretty much only doing rent-to-owns in private lending to multifamily to flips. And she shifted over towards Calgary or Alberta, I should say. And she explains why she's done that. Like so many other investors that we've had on the podcast recently talking about getting out of Ontario for whatever reason that worked for her. And we also talked a lot about kids. We talked about setting things up so that the wealth that you accumulate in your lifetime doesn't go to waste, because there is this statistic that wealth only lasts for about 3 generations. And she said that's a Chinese saying as well. So if you plan on making sure your legacy lasts more than that, we talked a little bit about some of the strategies towards achieving that. So I hope you guys will enjoy the episode. I would really appreciate if you could share this with a friend or family member that would benefit from the information. And if you can leave us a 5-star review, that would be greatly appreciated as well, especially on Apple Podcasts. And then finally, if you want to download a bunch of really cool reports, so we've got some about multi-unit renovations. We've got one on IKEA kitchens under $1,000 for rental properties, and so many other ones that you can download for free. You could go to www.welloff.ca/report to download them all. So there you go. Enjoy the episode. I'm here with Brooke Shang. This is the second time you joined me on the podcast.
Yes.
The first time at this office. So thank you for coming by.
No problem.
What have you been up to lately? What's going on?
Well, a lot has changed since we last talked. And I think at that time, a lot of people are working on podcasts online. Mm-hmm. So a lot has changed. My investment in terms of what's in my portfolio has changed a lot as well. So when we last talked, I focused on lease option rent to own in Ontario. Mm-hmm. However, I don't think that works well for me now of where I am. So I do believe every investor should be focusing on the strategy that helps them reach their financial goal for the time. Mm-hmm. And for me right now, most of my investments are pretty passive. I was never a money partner, meaning I was always the one that looks for deals and finding investors. Now I'm also joining other working partners to be money partners. I'm also still active myself as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just for people that might be listening to your story for the first time, can you just give us a really quick recap of how you started and how you got to where you are?
Oh, great. Okay. And it's funny because my office is literally 5 minutes from here. Mm-hmm. And I stay at home with my kids for 10 years, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when I started working, we paid more taxes. The kids were older at the time. Our expenses were really high, and our tax were pretty high as well. Mm-hmm. And now I've learned a lot about even tax planning. At that time, I'm thinking, this is not making sense because we didn't save anything. The only thing we had in our portfolio was the condo we lived in because there's equity. Mm-hmm. We weren't even investing. We were just lucky that we were in Toronto. And I thought, okay, if we save nothing and paying a lot of tax, the only thing is real estate. This is where I want to learn and where I want to get started. Mm-hmm. And my first goal was basically to see whatever I learned was working. That was it. So I focused on rent to own because lease option, we would say there's a lease, there's an option to purchase. Because I thought, okay, if I want something that really cash flows. So at the time, I wasn't comfortable getting into multi-unit or even renovating because that wasn't what I was familiar with. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, if I understand the finances, we could still make single-family homes cash flow. This is where I want to get started. Mm-hmm. And I can have enough cash flow to replace my working income.
Right. What year was that where you started doing the rent-to-owns?
2017.
2017. That's the same year that I started investing, actually.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you went from there, and then you told me, like we were just kind of chatting a little bit, and you said your life changed or your strategy has changed. Have your financial goals also changed? Is that why you've steered away from rent-to-own?
So I will say a couple of things. First, yes, my financial goals have changed because when I was active, I had a website, I had to answer a lot of calls, answer a lot of emails. And I realized that's not the way I wanted to work. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, okay, now we accumulated some capital. We can generate passive income some other ways. And another thing I realized is, okay, lease option rental is 3 to 4 years. It sounds like not a short-term strategy. once you started investing, say 2020 from 2017, by that time I had to close a lot of my lease options. That means I constantly have to look for new deals. So at that time, I'm thinking, okay, even though I want something to build wealth, this is only generating income for 3 to 4 years for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
How are you finding the private mortgages right now? Did you get stuck in some bad situations like some other investors have, or has it been okay for you?
It has been okay for me so far because we do invest on a few single family homes ourselves as well. And like I mentioned, a lot of the times, even though I even converted a few duplexes, if you remember, in 2017, that's what everybody did. We sold quite a few of those. And even though we thought, okay, we're going to keep them as our long-term strategy. And as you know, once you refinance, that's the burr. Once you refinance, the cash flow is not going to be there. And that's why people are looking for third unit, fourth unit, or garden suites. And that doesn't make sense for us anymore because you need 3 units, 4 units to cash flow. So we thought, okay, we'll sell these properties and then take the funds to better use them to more efficiently generate more cash flow and even buy and sell to create more capital as well.
So you are working, as you mentioned. Is your husband also working?
Yes, he's working.
Okay.
So he's more in the background. He loves his job. So our goal was not to retire him. And actually, it's a family business. So for him, it's more likely he's going to stay in there. Yeah. For me, I'm thinking, okay, because I do believe you want to spend your time on something you love to do. So for him, if it's his business, he want to stay in. That's what he is still working on. For me, I love teaching. I love talking to you. And I think, okay, if that's how I'm going to generate my active income, meaning trading my time for money, I'm okay with that. However, that has to be by choice of doing what I love to do.
So I guess the question that I was wondering, since you're both working and you're doing private lending, how do you kind of work around that from a tax perspective so you don't get taxed a really, really high amount?
Interesting enough, when I was starting, I was self-employed, right? So just like brokers, my husband is an insurance broker. So for a lot of people, yes, you have some deduction, you're still paying personal income. When I switched to real estate, I actually brought my business into my corporation. So I'm paying the 12% tax instead of paying the self-employed personal income. So that's something I learned that helped me save a lot of tax as well. So that actually helped because when I started my corporation, I had a different accountant then. He was saying, Brooke, because the company that hired me as a consultant. So he said, for example, if you want to incorporate, there's only one business in there. For a year or two, that's okay. However, it's very obvious my company didn't want to set up the company that hired me didn't want to set up an entity here to save tax. So if they just pay you as an employee, it's more like a pass-through. So it's good that I started to have other businesses and started my corporation. That actually helped me a lot to bring the other business in. So I have other students, for example, if they're physicians, if they have other businesses, even learning how real estate work, help them to understand, hey, how I can structure my corporation to save tax the exact same way that I did before.
Right. Makes sense. And if we go back to the rent-to-own thing, so you said you're not doing that in Ontario anymore, but can you tell us where you're doing it?
I'm working on more deals in Alberta now. I have a few live ones in Alberta. And before we started, I did mention that we did have some long-term rental, even duplexes or small multis, we constantly ran into tenant issues, even for lease options. Even though they do come in with what we called option consideration. That means they have a stake in the game. Still, if things happen, life happens, if the law allows people to do certain things, that's not landlord friendly where we are. So I think it's just a matter of when. Even though it wasn't horrible for us, 1 or 2 cases that really changed my mind about having the rental business in Ontario. One thing I actually mentioned earlier is the mortgage environment kept changing. That's another thing, operating in the space for a while now. Whatever was okay then, even though we plan for them to be homeowners in 3 years, for example, it might not be the same 3 years after. So I'll give you one quick example. Back then, when we were qualifying them as tenant buyers, we didn't have to see what the market rent was at that time. Now, when the mortgage brokers qualify them for a mortgage, they have to see what was the market rent at the time. That's kind of a way for them to see their ability to pay additional rent or additional mortgage. That wasn't the requirement then. And that slowed the process for some tenant buyers to qualify. That wasn't something we foreseen then.
So if we go back to the COVID years, did you have tenants that stopped paying? Is
Yes.
that sort of what happened? So can you tell us kind of what happened in that situation?
I had regular tenants that stopped paying.
Oh, okay, not rent to own.
I also have rent-to-own tenants that stopped paying. So two extreme cases. I mean, that's not everybody. A lot of the times they knew it's a matter of time they would leave. However, as I think words spread pretty quickly, as they know, hey, I don't have to move right away. And landlord tenant board will basically give me the time to deal with it, etc. So the longest I've dealt with was over 2 years. And that was a year and a half after the lease option term ended. So they didn't, not only did they not succeed, they just dragged on until they really have to go. And unfortunately, I realized where they moved to. Real estate network is pretty basically this big. I know where they moved to. I know their current landlord actually had a horrible tenant too, and they had a brand new house. Unfortunately, my worst tenant is moving in that house. So anyways, I'm not aiming to scare anybody. However, that's the reason I moved out of Ontario, because even if nothing happens now, if you have enough tenants, something's going to happen. Yeah.
So in this situation, because that's one of the things about rent to own is that there's that security that the tenants are going to take care of the house because it's going to be theirs.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case. There are situations where maybe tenants, things change for them. They no longer want the house and they might still take advantage of the laws. That's what you're saying.
For this tenant in particular, they did take care of the house. However, they realized, hey, even if because in Ontario, for example, the rent is actually pretty high. It wasn't an entry-level home. It was above 500, for example. Even if they came in, they had $24,000 pretty much saved until they stopped paying. However, if they stopped paying and dragged on for more than a year, the money ran out pretty quickly. And I've also known there are tenants who couldn't find a rental. So they wanted to get into the program, even though I'm paying you $18,000, $20,000 in advance. That's still better than me prepay rent for a year. So I realized, hey, even that is not going to work, because if I wait a year or so, if anything happens, that's not going to cover it. However, we really do screen tenants very, very carefully. After COVID, I do think because things are slowing down, so that timeline get dragged a little bit longer.
Can you tell us a little bit about your tenant screening process?
We still do the regular, we check your references. We do talk to your landlord and previous landlord, your employer letter. We look at your credit report. And basically, if it's a regular tenant, that's what we do. If it's a lease option or rent to own, we have to go beyond that. We look at their expenses. How are they managing their expenses? Can they really qualify? What's the reason they're in the situation that they couldn't qualify for a mortgage? And I also realized, hey, I have to talk to actually more than one mortgage brokers because they're specializing in different things. Some tenant buyers, even though they don't qualify today, some mortgage brokers might still be able to find them a mortgage, slightly more than what they are looking for in the market. However, even coming to a lease option, they do have to save up a little bit more as well.
And today, so you said you would still like work by referral if somebody was referred to you. What would you be doing? Would you be the investor that's buying the property in that situation?
I have been. So I have been the investor buying the property as well. I've also have investors that are working with me. They're going to be qualifying, and I will be managing the tenants as well. So I do it both ways. And Basically, I do it three ways. I could be the money partner somebody could manage, or I could be the managing partner, or I can do both and just take on the tenant as well.
Okay. Which one has been the most successful for you out of those three options?
Oh my God. Actually, there's no difference, I would say, in terms of cash flow success, in terms of what my return is. Of course, it would be when I'm also managing, I'm also the money partner, because I don't have to share the equity or the cash flow.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else are you doing? So you mentioned that you've done some flips. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Are you still doing flips today, or is that something you've done in the past?
I've done in the past. I did that in Ontario, for example. Even though we say when we teach that distressed property is a strategy, it doesn't matter which way the market goes. As long as you find something, there's enough money in the buy. When I was in that space, I was really lucky because, in Ontario at the time, even when I was a money partner in the States or when other people are flipping, when you're buying the property, when the market kept going up, it's more forgiving, right? So there's also a situation where there are a lot of people purchasing properties from wholesalers, or they purchase at the time when the market is high. Even though it looks like you have money in the buy, when the interest rate kept going up, your money in the buy gets eaten up pretty quickly. So I've seen people get into trouble that way as well. I've seen people aiming to sell the property even before they could renovate because they realize it's not making sense. They couldn't. I've also have investor where they bought pre-construction condos. Now they're upside down. So even though they put in the deposit, maybe they're better off letting it go. Yeah. So when I was in Ontario, we're okay if it's delayed a week or so because we had that buffer. Right now, I think even experienced flippers have to be careful. Yeah.
So are you doing any flips outside of Ontario?
I'm the money partner now. I'm no longer hiring contractors and doing the work. So you can say I'm more passive now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about multi-units? So you said you invest a little bit in multi-units.
As well. So outside of Ontario as well. So mainly still because of the tenant laws. So I do that aiming to have more passive income and generating wealth or legacy for the next generation, even though I personally don't think we should just give the kids whatever we have inherited. However, I think at least I want them to understand how it works and preserve that. It's funny because you mentioned multi-space. A lot of the times the owners are selling because the next generation don't want to take care of it. Or it is a lot of work if you don't know what to do, if you're self-managing. So that's where opportunity comes. That's where a lot of aging units, the next generation just want to get rid of the property and get the money out.
Well, that's one thing I've been thinking about because like somebody was saying recently, there's a stat that generational wealth only typically lasts like 3 generations.
There's a Chinese saying.
Okay, what is that?
Wealth doesn't pass 3 generations. Yeah, and
so that's kind of scary. Like you're working so hard to create this wealth.
Yeah.
And to think it's not going to last more than a couple generations. Is there anything you're doing to make sure that it does go beyond the 3 generations?
Yes, funny enough that you mentioned it. I only recently started to do that. And that's because my kid just turned legal. So whatever we did in the past, our will, etc., needs to be renewed anyways. And I realized when I was being educated, because everybody's goal is so different. When we were being educated, we were just told, build the 3-tier. So set a structure up right. However, there's a lot more beyond that. And every year, even though I'm in the business 7 years now, for example, my portfolio changed so much. So even what I learned in the past might not apply to who I am today. So my portfolio constantly changes. I have to change the way I plan as well. So funny enough, I'm going to talk to a state lawyer tomorrow because something I've learned, if you're starting today, perhaps you want to set up a trust today. Because what I have to do is I have to spend 5 figures to freeze my estate. From that point on, I can build up a family trust. Then it could go to my kids. And family trust is a different thing. Do you want to build a family trust or just a regular trust? I'm not completely done yet because you have to look at where you are today and what your goals are.
Yeah.
And like I said, your kids are so young and my kids are turning legal now.
Can you tell us a little bit about the family trust? I know I've heard about this before. I think from what I remember, it only makes sense to do a family trust like if you have a certain amount of wealth, because it's very expensive, or it could be very expensive to set up. Can you tell us what you know about it?
I'm in the preparation stage. I'll tell you what I'm doing now. And also, I'm just also starting to learn about insurance as well, life insurance as an investor. I know that when we're learning, same thing, you want to get to flips, you want to get to multi-unit, you want to get a lease option and everything. When you're hearing about estate planning, you want to get into everything. However, it doesn't make sense. And like I said, just to freeze where I am today, that cost me 6 figures. So, and how much insurance do you need? And there's ways of borrowing the money out of your life insurance and continue to invest. However, you have to think what your goals are. Do I just spend more money so I have money to invest? Or can I kill 2 birds with 1 stone? How can I manage my estate planning in order to structure it right? So what I'm doing right now is looking at all my corporations. I didn't set up it correctly, by the way. I opened up new corporations thinking I'm going into a new province. I didn't have to do that. However, there's enough properties under each corporation, it's making sense.
Okay.
So what I'm doing first is to add up whatever the corporation is worth. So for example, if my kids, knock on wood, I hope they do know how to manage. If they don't, they have to liquidate everything we own. At least life insurance covers whatever they have to pay in tax.
Right.
So when my husband and I were looking at, okay, how much insurance should be on each of us? We were thinking, okay, we're both worth, let's say, $2 million. However, that means that's a $4 million insurance, life insurance. The premium is crazy high. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So what we're looking at is not just literally say how much we think we're worth. We're actually now take a step back, looking at, okay, this is our corporations. How much do they all worth today? Whatever they're worth today, we're going to freeze it at that. However, there's still some wealth in it. We should have done it before we start to accumulate wealth. So right now we're freezing it, setting it up whatever value it is today. So after I talk to my accountant about that, I'm going to talk to my estate lawyer to say, okay, if that's the case, I'm going to pay whatever it is. I don't care at this point because I realize we will have a lot of tax to pay. So we'll freeze it from that point. Whatever is growing beyond that point, we'll have the tax saving. However, whatever is grown in the corporation, we might not set it up the most optimum way that we could have. So from that point, you know how much it's worth, freeze that. Yes, it's going to be a lot of freezing estate fee. However, it is worth it. We always say it's not about how much it costs you. It's about how much it saves you. Yeah. So if it saves us in the future for tax, then we are planning to do it. We're in the process of doing that. So when we started learning about real estate, even though we were only taught to set up the 3 tiers, really, because I realized, by the way, not a lot of people have kids these days compared to the past. They really don't need the same structure as we do. And I even think, okay, even if we donate all the money we have at that point when we pass, I don't want the government to take everything. I still want to have control where the money goes. So even if it's charity, I'm okay with that. However, right now, I still want my kids to have some control. I want the money to go to places I want the money to go to. Then that's why I'm setting it up.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. That's one thing that I think about as well, which you kind of touched on. Like yourself and I, we were able to manage our portfolios. We know how to deal with real estate, but maybe the kids aren't going to be interested, or maybe they're not capable of dealing with it the way we do. So if all we have is real estate, then that might not be the greatest thing. So I'm just thinking ahead, obviously not right now for me, but maybe 10 years down the line, do I diversify so that I have like a bunch of money in stocks and they can just live off the dividends or something like that for the future? Is that something you've considered as well, or something you've already done?
So yes, we've already invested in futures. So part of the curriculum we have right now, I'm not the one teaching the stock portion. So the passive training is done by bots, because humans have emotions, we have fear, we have greed. So I realized, hey, I'm not going to look at it all the time. So we do have stocks, and also we have shares in my husband's company. That's also a part of our accumulated wealth as well. And on the personal side, even because before we learned about real estate. It's not just about real estate, by the way, because like I said, we have shares in insurance, we have stocks and passive income, etc. And even within real estate, this is different streams of income. Because you flip within a year, you hold it long term, you sell it with capital gain, it's already different streams of income. So I think even for the kids, they have to understand how money works, even though if it's not in real estate. And like, even though I mentioned I flip, I was actually the furthest from flipping. If I think back when I started coming to Canada to live in a condo. I don't even change light bulbs. I call the security. The condo maintenance actually does it. So it doesn't matter if it's not your specialty. Hire somebody to do it. However, if you open up a restaurant, if you buy stocks, if you invest in company shares, a lot of it is parallel to investing and setting up corporations as well and managing money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can go back to when you started, 2017, would you apply a different strategy? Or would you, are you happy with the way things have gone and you would just continue doing it the way you did?
It's funny that people always think back. And the person I am then, I probably will still do the same thing.
Yeah.
I was more comfortable with dealing with numbers or money, not as much as the physical building, etc. However, later on, I realized, hey, even so, you can still get it into multi-unit or even mortgages, invest in a different way and still get involved in the project. So looking back, I would say I probably would still run a little bit faster because it took me 4 years to be financially free. That's actually pretty long. A lot of people could do it because I've seen people doing it in a matter of months or even, I'm not saying you could do it tomorrow. It's not a getting rich quick strategy. However, you could definitely do a lot faster. So one thing, for example, we were building our home at the time. We were looking to move up to a bigger home. So I was really careful about not using our own mortgage ability. I was thinking, okay, maybe if we did, we could run a little bit faster because we can fund our own projects. However, at the same time, I probably wouldn't work as hard to find joint venture partners, and I wouldn't be comfortable getting into joint venture as much if I didn't have a lot of joint venture to get myself started. Yeah. So.
Well, the other thing about what you're saying about financial freedom, it all depends on where you're starting. If you are 25 years old and you only have $20,000, you're probably not going to reach financial freedom in 2 or 3 years. It's going to take you longer. But if you're getting started at 40 and you've got $2-3 million in the bank, then that's another story, right?
Yeah, it's funny in a way because I've now even learned from the students' experiences. When you're 20, you're thinking, I don't have funds. I couldn't get started. And when you're in your 40s, a lot of people are thinking, I finally accumulated $1 million, $2 million. I don't want to screw this. Then they're really careful. So I think it's always about how to deal with being uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah. So when you're young, some people are thinking, I look too young. Nobody's going to come joint venture with me. Not really the case as long as you get over that hump. Yeah.
And just to go back to your kids.
Yeah.
What have you done to teach them about money, to teach them about real estate, to make sure that, they don't blow it moving forward? When you're no longer around, share with us a little bit about that if you can.
Actually, I keep pivoting because I realize even kids, they're figuring out their lives. So when they're young, they will listen. And they don't fully comprehend what you're talking about. My kids started reading, for example, Rich Dad Poor Dad at a very young age. They don't fully comprehend how it works. I was the same. I read that book in the year 2000 when it first came out. I waited until 2016 is when I started the very first, they call it workshop, basically the entry seminar. That's where I started to learn. And 2017 is really how I started getting into it. So I'm thinking, even back then, I waited so many years, they have to go through their own path. What we can do as parents is really just being an example. Say they perhaps don't understand exactly how a building, etc., works at this point. At least they see that how you work in your business. They see you're making phone calls. They see how you manage money, how your view on money is very different. So I'll give you one example because we were in a car And on the radio, they were saying, we're going to pay off your student loan. We're going to pay off your mortgage. And then my kid was asking me, how come you're so comfortable with a lot of mortgages? And how much are we paying on mortgages? And their friends' parents are saying, we have to pay down our mortgages. It's debt, things like that. And I just started to have a conversation with them saying, okay, right now the mortgage is 5%. What's the inflation rate? At least they know that because they're in school. That is 7%. They understand how inflation works. So I'm asking them, aren't they giving us money or lending us money lower than what the money is actually costing everybody?
Yeah.
Then they're like, oh, okay. However, one point I want to point out to them is that, okay, a lot of people are not borrowing that money because they don't know how to manage it. They don't know the difference between good debt, bad debt. That's how you need to learn at this point.
Yeah.
And if they don't have the pain, I mean, even the previous generation, I'm sure they look at us thinking it's very comfortable for us. So for them, we travel a lot and they realize we live in a nice neighborhood. We don't really worry about money as much. Then they do want to have that life. How come other parents are kept talking about money, or how come so and so? Not even other parents or even your relatives. I'm sure there are people within your close circle that are still worrying about money.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I want to ask you about, because some cultures are very conservative when it comes to mortgages and debt. A lot of cultures, they just tell you to pay off your mortgage, don't take on too much debt. Was that the case for you? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Yes. And besides the mortgage, I didn't have any debt at that point. And I remember I had to invest in my education. And like I said, all our wealth is in the house or in the property. And we struggle to contribute to RSP because we still have personal income. So when we had to bundle money out from our HELOC, at that point, it was 3.25%. I was struggling to get the money out to invest in my tuition. And I remember the person sitting across me from the table was saying, Brooke, your hands were literally shaking, handing me the credit card. So yes, because I think I started, like you said, I started when I was 40. So if I didn't start, I was already thinking, if I don't start now, and I read the book 10 years ago, if I don't start now, more than 10 years, if I don't start now, I probably will still be scared and still be thinking. So if somebody is willing to show me the way, I'm willing to invest. So yes, I was really scared about that. And at that time, we paid most of our mortgages. I would say we only have probably 30% of loan to value.
Oh, okay.
So we still had a mortgage, not huge, and it's less than any rent in Toronto at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. I think we covered a lot. What's the future going to be like for you? What are you going to be focusing on moving forward? And what do you envision?
I envision me, or at least our family, enjoying our life, enjoying what we do. So it's great that we always have financial goal. However, now the goal is different. I'm not looking to say I'm going to cover my passive income financially free anymore. It's more about, okay, let's have some fun. Say, for example, I would think, okay, by the time my son is, say, 20 or something, next milestone, we will have the estate set up, so at least we'll have asset protection. And certain passive income will cover, say, for example, trips. That's why also when I reach my financial freedom, I'm like, what's next? I think a lot of people actually reach that point. I still enjoy teaching. I still enjoy sharing. Like I'm talking to you now, I still enjoying that a lot. So I want to continue to do that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big things I absolutely love to do. Speaking about, not just about real estate, because we talk about mindset, we talk about how we're going to accumulate wealth, even talking about kids, how are we going to help the next generation? And it's funny because I've seen some students coming to the basic seminars. They're only 17, 18. Then I'm thinking, my son is 19 now. However, why is he not ready yet? So I'm looking at different characteristics that might be there.
Yep.
And I also think sometimes all of us, we have to have a pain point for us to want to start doing something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
I think that's very important. If somebody's going through a lot of financial struggles, or maybe they grew up in a house where there was financial struggles, they might be more motivated to move forward versus somebody who always kind of grew up and everything was okay financially, right? It's a different story.
Yeah.
One last question for you. For any young listener that has a goal to become financially free, what do you think would be the best path to doing that? Like, how do you structure your life so that you can get there as efficiently as possible?
I think they have to figure themselves out, what they really want to do, what they like, who they are first. It sounds cliche, but even as adults, we ask them, who are you? What's really driving you today? Then you can find your goal. After you've found your goal, then let's look at different buckets of income. Is it active income that you need to accumulate capital? Or are you a little bit older at the point where you should have some assets, like money in the piggy bank? Or you need to have passive income. So if you're sick or anything happens, you're okay. So for example, my kid is in university and he's actually looking for a job. I really don't care about a university degree. I'm okay if he wants to drop out, etc. However, I think he should go through the process to figure out what he wants to do. So for a lot of kids, he's the same. He goes into university, find the most general major he could find in order to figure himself out. And now he's looking for a job for a co-op. At the same time, I want him to see that, hey, you have to find your heart. Do you want to invest your time, your energy to find a job that you might not like? Or you want to harvest that energy and focus on investing and learn how it works. So when they're young, just learn about everything, even if it's something to help you eliminate what you hate. Perfect. Then do that. They have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So get yourself educated first, because I think, like I said, you have to figure yourself out. How do you do that? By going through the path, by going through education. So the funny thing is, my parents are both teachers. So for our family, education is really important. Basically, we have to get a master's degree in order for us to be independent in my parents' eye.
Okay.
In order to get out, in order for them to say, okay, now you're adult, you've done all you had to do, completed your obligations at that point. I don't see that. However, I think going to school, they have to learn about discipline. At least finish your homework. At least learn how to do research, how to come up with a report, how to present yourself, how to network. And that's great. I don't care what major you're in. I don't care if you really go to the top-notch university. And I mean, we have RESP, etc. However, if you're borrowing money and get yourself to debt beyond you can afford, definitely don't do that. In the States, if you're going to Harvard or University in New York, it's going to cost you $500,000. How are you ever going to pay that back?
Right.
Yeah. And that doesn't make sense, because it's also a debt you could not shake off even if you declare bankruptcy. How is that making sense? And as an investor, don't we always look at ROI, return on investment? So even though I have a master, I have an MBA, regardless, it doesn't matter. I don't tell my investor that, because they care about what my experience is.
Yep.
Why am I able to grow their money at the rate better than GIC, better than what they put in the bank and mutual funds, for example?
Did you butt heads with your parents a lot because you have a different perspective and different way of seeing things?
I didn't, actually. No. And even, it's funny enough, I don't think they fully knew what I was doing. They only saw the results later on. And even if we talk about it today, I think we will still butt heads. However, I'm not the confrontational type, and I never was, never am. So even if they're talking about education, etc., I'm like, I'll just let it be and do my own thing and be an example. So even when education, for example, traditional school education will teach your kids how to be a great employee, how to put up a great Excel sheet, PowerPoint, Canva, whatever they use today. At the same time, it doesn't really matter to me. I want them to see that, hey, you just have to have these skills in order to have value. And I do think even if you're in real estate, whatever you're in, is really the value you have, that's going to generate wealth. And one thing, actually, when we talk about a lot of parallels in real estate, and I just also later learned that VTB, vendor take back, is also a way where a lot of business sell to the next owner, because basically they also have to teach the next person the know-how in a lot of cases. If it's a laundromat, if it's even accounting firm, etc., a lot of our team members, lawyers, they pass down their portfolio, or even insurance brokers. They pass their portfolio by utilizing vendor take back. And that's what a lot of people utilize when they purchase apartment buildings. So there's a lot of parallels, and cost, and also amortization, for example. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I think there was a lot of value here for anyone listening that, has kids and that wants to figure out what to do with the next generation. Any final thoughts before we end the podcast?
I was just going to add one more thing. So my kids don't know what's in there. They don't know what's in the trust. Because sometimes I think if you have the safety net, you're not going to work as hard. So I still want them to experience life. However, they're not going to start the starting point that we started at. They're going to build upon whatever is next.
Yep. And
for you to have that hockey stick growth, sometimes we love Drake's song, from the bottom, now you're here. Yeah. However, if you're already pretty close to the top, is also a little bit harder to grow.
Right.
Yeah. So again, final thoughts, make sure, even for ourselves, things constantly change. Even for people starting today, they might not see the appreciation, the low interest that we saw. Just make sure, I think if you have the mindset, if you have the muscles, if you are okay with being uncomfortable, getting used to that, then you'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much for sharing all this.
Thank you, George.
Just to end things off, do you want to tell people what services you offer and how they can reach you?
Yes. So I'm a mentor trainer with Trust Your Talent. I don't train or mentor outside of Trust Your Talent Academy. And if people just want to learn what I do, there's also free webinars that I host. Everything I do, there's a purpose for me and for audience as well. Even my book, I do think there should be a purpose. So for me, I want to be able to communicate with people, because even if we have a podcast for 45 minutes, I want to make sure I'm a good communicator. So I would love to hear your feedback for the webinar. My goal is for you to want to at least get started. Then at least you don't have to feel that it's so scary because somebody has already done it. For myself, I do want to constantly improve in terms of communication, in terms of how I can help you as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm sure you're doing a great job. I know you have a lot of experience and a lot of value to share. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Same. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Your support is truly appreciated. And if you can share this with a friend or family member that might benefit from the information, remember, our goal is to motivate and inspire others to take action and to build wealth and to become well off. Enjoy the rest of your day.